Welcome back to Tech Beyond Gender podcast. I'm your host, Meena Satish Kumar. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Irene Naidu. Irene is not only a visionary leader, but also a passionate advocate for gender equality in technology. With her dynamic background in digital innovation and strategic leadership, she has been at the forefront of initiatives that empower women and underrepresented voices across the tech landscape. Irene's work has consistently pushed the envelope, merging cutting edge technology with a deep commitment to inclusivity and change. From spearheading transformative projects to mentoring emerging tech talent, her journey is a shining example of how dedication and innovation can reshape industries and create a more equitable future for all. So, whether you're a tech enthusiast or a budding entrepreneur or someone inspired by the power of diversity and inclusion, stay tuned. Today's conversation with Irene Naidu promises to inspire, challenge, and ignite new ideas on how we can all contribute to a more inclusive digital world. Thanks for joining us today, Irene. Welcome to the podcast.
Wow, kia ora, Mina. Thank you for such an amazing welcome to your podcast. I'm very humbled to be a guest on your show. So thank you so much.
Great. So I can see you have a background, Tech Babes NZ,
Mhm.
and I know you're spearheading Tech Babes NZ. To begin with, do you think there is gender discrimination in technology sector?
Short answer, yes. Um, Sadly, I have still been witness to a lot of bias in the sector. And look, it's been in the background. It's been there since I came into the sector 20 plus years ago, and it's not as forefront, but it is definitely there. And one one recent example that I definitely want to share where, not only does it make you feel uncomfortable, but it's sort of when it's a recent bias that you encounter, you start to feel like, wow, I really thought we had come a long way, but now I see that there's still a lot of work to do in terms of gender bias. And this particular example happened last year. I was speaking with some senior leaders, and one of the senior leaders mentioned that he was interviewing for a particular role for a project within his team, and he found an amazing candidate. She ticked all the boxes, but she was newly married, and so his concern was, if I hire this young lady into my team, she might want to have babies and go on maternity leave. And my mouth just dropped that he just so casually said this. And I actually had to ask him to please stop talking because I was so offended that he felt it was okay to just say, oh, I'm not going to hire someone because she may or may not decide to have children. And then I'll have a gap in my team. How do I fill that team? And I think with all the work that yourself and the Tech Babes NZ team are doing, it's very disheartening to still see that bias coming out in the industry, just casually. And so still a lot of work to do.
Mm. Now, if I take a step back and if I put myself in the shoes of this manager, do you think this manager could just be planning for resources within his team for the next few years? Do you think it's a genuine concern?
Well, I mean, my feeling is that if you find someone that can do the role, um, who knows what their plans are for the future.
Mm.
But if they've ticked all the boxes and if they know how to do the job, there shouldn't be this bias against them because they may or may not decide to have children in the future. And yes, I understand, he's probably trying to protect his team, and because once you train someone up and then if they do go on maternity leave, there is that gap. But that could happen at any time with any team member. That could happen with one of his male team members where they decide to take paternity leave. So this should never be the deciding factor.
It is so interesting, right? Like, even in this day and age, women are considered as a primary caregivers for kids.
Correct.
Now, is it good or not? Like, is it good to actually consider that women would need to be the primary caregivers for their children? Or is this some assumption that we have that's just so ingrained in our culture? We've just seen this over the years and we just make this blind assumption, and then just we just assume that this is how it's going to be.
Yeah, I feel like there is the assumption that that's how it is. A lot of it could do with the cultural background of the person as well. But times are changing, and you definitely are starting to see, more dads putting their hand up and saying, actually, I want to be a part of the whole beginnings of my child entering the world, and just taking that part and taking more of a step back in terms of their career, and letting their partner move up in their career, or focus on, sometimes they'll be in a transition period where they're actually moving into a newer role. And so I have seen in the industry that compromise between couples, which has been nice to see.
So now let's take a complete step back. Now,
Sure.
can you take us back to your childhood? What were some of the early influences that shaped you, who you are today?
My biggest influencer from my childhood would be my mum. So my dad passed away when I was quite young, and it was just me, my mum, and my brother. My younger brother, he was at the time, he had a physical disability, so my mum was his primary carer. So yeah, money was tight in our household, but she was always my soundboard, and I started working from a young age in a factory, very unglamorous role, and but I was very interested in learning about computers, and she sort of gave me that nudge into starting a certificate in computing course while I was working, and just learning the basics of how a computer works, how putting a computer together, all the typing side of things. Computers were very different over 20 years ago, as you probably remember too. But she was definitely my biggest influencer, and kept nudging me to follow into the technology world. I feel like she could see that this was going to be a viable career pathway for me, before I even realized it was.
Very nice. Did you have any role models growing up who inspired your journey, especially someone in tech?
Maybe not growing up, because the beginning part of my career in the tech space was learning as much as I could. I started right in the beginning stages of the technology side, or the early side was data entry, and then I moved into customer service, and then moved into more of an operational role, and learned how the back end of a technology company works, all the numbers that are associated with all of these technology companies coming into effect, and or moving into the New Zealand market. And it was really interesting because along the way I started to pick up on not so much mentors. I wouldn't call them mentors, but they were um, experts in their particular field within the industry who I would learn from.
Mhm.
Um, and they would be so willing to share their knowledge. And so to me, I called them my champions, because to this day we're still all in touch, and they have been my champions throughout my career as my career has progressed.
How important are those champions in life? Like, how do you recognize them?
I think, there's more and more champions coming up in the workplace. As you start new working environments, you sort of find the people that are willing to help or willing to show you different ways of doing things or how they do things, and just sharing in their knowledge. Because, when you're working with a senior leader and you're a junior, you're just absorbing so much information. And when you have someone that is sharing all that wealth of information with you, that's when I feel you found your champion, because they're not shy to show you the ropes, and they're not shy to take time out of their day to show you different aspects of different areas within the technology sector. And I think once you find those people, it's always great to just keep building on those relationships.
Hmm. So you mentioned that you've been working in technology sector for last 20 years, am I right?
Mhm. Correct, yes.
Yeah, so in the last 20 years, so you started off with a data entry role and then you moved on to different roles. At what stage in your career did you actually feel this is not right? There is a clear discrimination, there is bias in the sector, and I need to do something about it. When did this begin?
I'd say from the start.
Hmm.
So when I first came into the sector, um, I was determined to learn everything I could about, just the administration side of things. And there were very few females in the tech sector, and even fewer women of colour in the tech sector. So I felt, personally, very conscious that I was Indian in the tech sector, who was female. And so I would actually be ashamed of showing my true self or being my true self when I was working for these companies. And I do remember saying to my mum a few times, I wish I wasn't Indian at work. So I've come a long way since then, but yeah, that was definitely during my beginning, and that would have been my early 20s. Moving into, thinking about that now, one of the big reasons I've put Tech Babes NZ together is because I'm very passionate about allowing the females in tech, and even the males in tech, be proud of their diversity and be proud of their culture and be proud of their backgrounds. And it's not something to be ashamed of. And I think that is a positive step that the technology sector has taken, where there is a lot more focus around that.
Hmm. You mentioned in your early 20s, you sort of felt, oh, I wish I was not Indian at work. Why did you feel that?
Um, we have different cultural celebrations, for example, and when I would want to take, let's say, the day off to celebrate with family, I felt quite embarrassed to ask for that time off. Um, Not so much that I needed the time off or the day off, but more because I had to explain what it was. And back then, um, Diwali, for example, wasn't well recognized or well known in the industry, so people didn't know what I was talking about, and then I'd have to explain, and they'd be like, "Oh, okay, so." wow, what do you do? And then, I'd start to feel like, oh gosh, yeah, this is really um, outside of my comfort zone explaining it, if
Mm.
that makes sense. I just, because it's not as celebrated as it is um, in this day and age back then.
Mm. So, so being a woman, you said that there is bias in the sector.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yes.
adding another layer of ethnicity to it, how serious does this problem become?
I guess as you progress into different areas within the business, or even as you move up, more and more people sort of might have some unconscious bias that might be um, used in conversation. I'll give you an example. I was working late one evening. There was quite a few of us working late one evening with quite a large corporate company, and we had a team from India, some engineers from India who had flown in as well to were working on this big project. And so we're working away at night, and someone behind me starts being quite discriminatory on the phone against Indians. Now, we have the visitors from India who I could see in front of me feeling very uncomfortable that this conversation was happening in the office space. And I'm sitting in the middle, facing the engineers, and can hear very clearly what this person is saying behind me, and it was just nonstop, and it was derogatory, and they were joking to, I don't know who they were speaking to on the other end of the phone, but they were, yeah, it wasn't nice. I started to feel sad and angry all at once, because sad for the engineers that they have to hear this on their first day in our office, but also angry that this is actually happening while we're all working on an office floor. And I actually stood up and asked the person to stop talking. I said, you need to stop this now. Just stop. Please hang up the phone, whatever you need to do. But this is not okay. I'm like trying to stay composed. But because I was so upset that this was happening, and I could feel the sadness from the engineers that, oh, wow, is that person talking about me? Is she, as in me, going to get in trouble for saying something? Because it's very hard when you're in a new country as well, to understand how to deal with these situations. So I'm actually really glad I was there, and that person stopped and started apologizing, and obviously felt really bad. But again, that's the unconscious bias, and it just rolled off the tongue like it didn't matter
Mm.
until I said something.
Yeah. So, did you do your education in New Zealand as well?
Yes, yep. So I was born in Wellington, so all my education is in New Zealand, and when my father passed away, then we moved to Auckland. So I went to high school when we moved to Auckland, and but I did have to leave school early to work full time.
Mm. So, how was it growing up in this culture, in this environment, with I'm sure you had Indian cultural values inculcated in you at home. How did that work, starting from your from your school days or university days? How was it to integrate yourself into this?
Yeah, I think it was easier in Auckland, I think, because the school I went to was very diverse. whereas I was from a small town in in Wellington at the time called Petone. It's a lot bigger now, but back then it was quite a small town. Everybody knew one another, and we were one of two or three Indian families there. So very different. Whereas when I started high school, I had heaps of Indian friends, heaps of non-Indian friends. Yeah, it was very different. So it was much easier, I think. Um, yeah.
And like you're almost a Kiwi, right? You did your schooling here, university here. And when you started your first job as well, did you still find it quite odd? Like, did you feel that you're just an odd person out in that environment?
No, not really. Like
Okay.
I like meeting new people. I'm very much an extrovert, so I love chatting to everyone and getting to know people and getting to know people in my team. So that side of things, look, we had some great people in my teams.
Mm.
It was just more a personal, what I wouldn't show too much of who I was, or there'd be little things where I think, I don't eat pork and I don't eat beef, for example. And sometimes, when you go to a restaurant, you'd be like, sorry, I don't eat these like anything with these dishes in it. And in the earlier days, I felt quite shy about that, but now I'm like, oh yeah, these are the things I don't eat. I think because even a lot of diets have changed a lot over the years since they used to be. Like now we have a lot more vegans, a lot more vegetarians, so it's much easier now.
Yeah, exactly. So, how did you navigate the early stages of your career? And what were some of the key turning points that led you to where you are today?
So navigating through was my biggest thing was to learn as much as possible, because there is only so much you can learn from university or high school. But when you are learning on the job, that's a skill. These skills are things that you don't get taught. And so I would absorb so much information from the beginning of my career pathway, and just learning how to deal with people, I think, was so important. People of different backgrounds, introverts versus extroverts, in customer service, we'd also have angry people call up sometimes, and how to deal, how to calm those people down and calm the situation down, and just reiterate that you're actually there to help and you really want to help them. And sometimes that's all people need to hear. And so that, I think, that experience was really valuable to me as I progressed through careers, because that taught me how to deal with different personalities that you find yourself dealing with from time to time. And, over the years, I started to learn that, hey, you don't have to deal with someone swearing at you. You can actually say, hey, I'm trying to help you. I don't appreciate you swearing at me. If you don't stop, I am going to hang up the phone. And, most people will just stop in their tracks and be like, well, no, I don't want that because I need this person to help me. And, and I think a lot of that learning came from customer service, and dealing with different temperaments.
Hmm. So, what were some of the biggest hurdles you faced as a woman in your career?
One of the biggest ones would have been moving from an operational background into a sales role. That was a huge challenge for me because I wasn't sure if I could do it. I'd never done it before, and making that transition was definitely interesting. But I got given a shot at joining a team and being an inside salesperson, and I was not good. I was going to say absolute rubbish. I wasn't hitting the targets I needed to, being an inside salesperson. But the sales manager really saw something in me. And she said to me, I don't think this is the right role for you. I feel like You need to be outbound. You need to be visiting customers. And so the company took a gamble on me, and it paid off. She was absolutely right. Once I started visiting clients and building those relationships, I started to win a lot more new business for the company, to the point where they were like, our test worked, we're getting another BDM, and so that was really, really exciting. And then another one would have been, I was working for a company and I was afraid to tell them I was pregnant, because I had been we were interviewing for another role within the team when I just found out I was pregnant, and they didn't want to hire someone at the time who again, she ticked all the boxes, but she had 2 children under the age of 6. And that was the only reason they didn't want to hire her. So then here's me pregnant, about to tell them when I'm hitting my, I think the 13-week mark is when we decided to announce it. And I'm thinking, I have to tell them next week. If they're like this about hiring someone, what's going to happen to me? And then I was scared that, would I lose my job? Would they, change my role? Like, when you're about to become a parent for the first time, you get all of these things jumping in your mind. And that certainly happened for me. That was definitely challenging. But in the end, I mustered up the courage and told them. Sadly, it wasn't, it was disappointing how it was taken. The manager wasn't happy. The manager of the manager was also not happy. But hey, I told them the truth. That was the main thing. And I thought, well, it's too late to do anything anyway. I've told you now, and I've given it, I've told you in writing. So yeah, this is when I'm taking my maternity leave. So that was a bit of a disappointing thing, because I thought we'd come a long way at that point.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to challenge biases or advocate for yourself or for others?
100%. So I'm the type of person that believes in looking out for your team and working closely with your team. So I'll give you an example of when I joined a company once, and I started to notice the junior person in the team being bullied quite badly by someone who had been there longer, and not just the way this person was spoken to, but even on so we sat near each other, and sometimes I would go and chat to this person on his desk, and he'd be sitting there, and then a Teams message would pop up, and it was written really badly, and sort of putting this poor junior down. And I'd see this and I'd get so wound up, and I'm like, people can't speak to you this way. You do, and I would be telling the junior, and I'm like, this is not okay how this person is speaking with you. And you need to let the manager know, because it's not okay. This person wasn't his manager or anything. Not that that's okay if you're a manager to speak to anyone in that manner, but it was very basically undermining this person, and this person was very intelligent. So in the end, he mustered up the courage to tell his manager, and his manager did all the right things in the end. But, I think he just needed someone to sort of give him that push to say, hey, that's not okay that this person's speaking to you in this manner. And then I've been, sadly, like even quite recently, this would have been last year, I was on a call, and the senior leader decided it was okay to berate someone in his team in front of the entire team, which was awful, and it was uncomfortable. It was, you could see that person's whole demeanor just, like going down and fading. But not only his, the wider team, because everyone's feeling bad that this person is being berated. And it wasn't for anything that he had done wrong. It was just because he didn't come into the office that morning because he had a personal errand to do, which had been cleared with his manager anyway. So it was like, but this was again a senior leader probably trying to throw his weight around, or just, have the I'm the boss mentality. And I actually called a meeting the next day and said that behavior was not okay. You pulled down the morale of the entire team on that call, and that doesn't make for a productive team.
Mm.
And they understood, but I don't know if that's some sort of bias, or that's how they're just used to dealing with people. I was fairly new to the team as well, so I don't like to put up with those types of injustices that I see. I will call it out, because everyone deserves to have a great working environment, doing the job they love without being berated. For me, being in the industry as long as I have, I feel a bit more empowered to call it out. Whereas for someone from our youth, so, or early in their career, they wouldn't be as forthcoming to call something like that out. When I did call it out, um, over the next week, I started to get a bit of that, I'd say, the bad vibes coming towards me from this leader. And that, again, I felt very much like, is this bullying in the workplace? Am I being picked on because I spoke up on behalf of someone? So I think, again, the beyond gender discussion around these things do tend to happen, and still to this day, and it is unfortunate, but I think the more you do, highlight it and bring it up into meetings and raise it within a leadership environment or within a leadership team, the more you do it, the more hopefully people start to think, okay, this is not the way we should be moving forward as a company together. This is not what we want to be remembered as. And the more companies start to do that and have that sort of focus, I think they become more popular. More people want to start working for companies that do encourage all genders to work together and not have that type of situation where the females are scared to put their hand up because they've seen something wrong, or they just want to say something on behalf of their male counterparts where they've seen this is not okay, but then they're too afraid to say anything because they themselves might become a target. And so the tech babes world that I sort of have started to embrace is gender neutral. And I'll get I started it purely because I wanted to create like a great community in the tech space for male and female. And in my previous roles, I'd call some of the guys in my team, I'm like, you're all tech babes, we all work together, and we all bring different ideas to the table, and that's the awesome part of being a tech babe, because it's all about bringing in your diverse passions and your thoughts and your process, and that is, like they say, where the magic happens. And so that's very important to me, that I keep sharing that message.
So when did you start Tech Babes?
Tech Babes, I started, gosh, I'm losing track of time, not last year, the year before, so quite new, and it was something I wanted to put together to create a community for women to network. And from there, it sort of started to expand into who else can I be helping? I've had a number of males from the industry reach out to ask me about advice, whether it's around bullying in the workplace, whether it's around what career steps they should be taking or could be taking, or because I've been very vocal about, at one point I was just all about numbers and um, working on spreadsheets to jumping into the whole world of sales. And so sometimes that does inspire some of the males in the industry where they're like, how did you do that? What did you do? How did you make that jump? Who helped you? And all of these questions would come about. So it's quite fun to be able to help the different all the different personalities in the tech space.
So, what is the vision for Tech Babes?
Oh, so many. So I took a bit of a breather from Tech Babes towards the end of last year while I was looking. I started a new role, and so I was learning a lot about that side. And moving forward, I really want to keep promoting creating communities for women in tech and encouraging them to network more with our male counterparts so that they start to build on their brand and build themselves in the industry, because a lot of the times we're not as good as doing that as women in tech as the men in tech are. And I do see a lot of positives about what comes about from the men doing that. And so I'm trying to get more and more women building that type of community as well, where they're drawing a lot of information and a lot of knowledge from the female leaders in the industry and getting everybody together so that they can hear from, the country managers who are the female of big corporates or large vendors. And, when you're a junior seeing a female in that type of position, you start to envision yourself like, oh, maybe I could be a country manager one day or a CEO or, so many different things that start to spark in the next generation's mind when you're a female just new in the industry, whether you're an engineer, etc. And then you see someone like this who has made a massive impact to the technology sector in New Zealand, and it starts to motivate you to want to be like them or follow a similar trajectory in their career.
What you mentioned was quite interesting, like how it's men. There's a lot of networking events, right? And you see a lot of men in a lot of these networking events. But when it comes to women, there are not many women who go out networking. Now, there are like several reasons, right? As we mentioned right at the start, women are primary caregivers either for their kids or for aging parents or anything within their family. So, when that is the case, how do you think we can design networking opportunities for women? Have you thought about it? What are you going to do to cater to women across all these situations?
Mm. One of the things that I do, so I think it was my second or third networking event. One of the ladies bought her 6-month-old, but with her husband. So her husband and the baby were not inside the networking event, but just in the building. But she needed the baby there because she had to breastfeed the baby at I think it would have been at about the 6 o'clock time. And I thought that was really cool. And so that is encouraged at these events, like when there's an event, I try to give as much notice as I can to a lot of women to say, hey, look, if you can make it, I try to keep it to the 2 hour time frame. And I message that if you can make it, great. If you can't, there's no pressure, but it's a great way to build on yourself and possibly find your next career manager. And that's actually happened from a few of my events where some of the ladies met their future bosses. So those are some really good stories. But in terms of what else could we be doing, I am looking at having some online discussions just around kind of like a virtual panel, where for the ladies that can't come to actual networking events, tying it together with some specific content that would possibly help them in the future in terms of what they could be doing in their career. But coming back to the networking, if you're wanting to move up in your career in the tech sector, networking is the way to do it. Because it's not always what you know, it's who you know. And when you meet all of these leaders, they'll remember you if you've made an effort to speak with them about who you are and what you do. That could be the point of difference between their hiring decision making, because they would have met you already and they're like, I feel like this person has what I need to bring to the team. And I think a lot of businesses have forgotten that path of meeting people and moving them into their teams, because they're so focused on just finding someone that ticks the boxes to come in and be the new person filling in a gap in their team, rather than actually meeting the person to seeing what their personality is like. Will that personality fit within the team? And I think that's another really important factor when businesses are looking at hiring new talent. Will that person fit in with the existing team? And so many times I've heard, there's always a bad apple. And it's like, well, you don't get to use the excuse, I've hired a bad apple, because that's not doing your due diligence as a manager or as a business. You don't just look at what's on someone's CV. You read that person's personality when you're interviewing them. And if you don't know how to do that, then you shouldn't be interviewing them. And again, that takes me back to, my background of customer service. I work off energies of people, and that's how I connect and see what I can straight away tell what kind of person someone is when I first meet them, just by their personality and the vibe that they're giving. I don't know if you find that as well.
Yeah, but a lot of the times my judgments have been wrong. So, yeah, so I just give the benefit of the doubt and just open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes that's the way to do it, depending on what it is you're looking for and what type of role or who you're looking for to bring into the team. Yeah, sometimes it can be hit or miss.
Yeah.
You can't always get it right.
Yeah. So now what are the biggest barriers preventing more women from entering and thriving in the tech industry, especially in those senior technical roles?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, look, I think 2025 has been an interesting year. The tech sector slowed down a little bit last year, but I see it's picked picked up quite significantly. They've made 2 strategic hires, female hires, for country managers and 2 very, very good businesses. And that's been exciting to see. It's like, oh, wow, that's amazing that they're, taking the reins of these 2 big corporates. And so I'm starting to see that shift, although in saying that, overseas, I think, has quite a bit of an impact on markets, such as the technology space. And lately, I have been seeing a lot of DEI bashing.
Mm.
And I'm sure you would have seen some pop up on your social media. Some of the leaders overseas sort of looking very negatively at DEI, and I like to think that New Zealand's risen above this by making some great appointments this year, and long may that continue.
Mm. So now you have been like, this is a question which I'm quite intrigued to ask you, because I've been currently working on the survey data that we completed end of last year. And
Yes.
I'm seeing quite interesting results when it comes to pay equity side of things.
Oh,
Not many
yes.
women feel that they're not being paid in par with other genders, or even
Mhm.
gender diverse people feel the same. And also, they feel that the pay policies or the compensation policies are not very open. Um,
Mm.
so they don't, some of them are like not even sure if they're being paid well within the organization because it's not very transparent. But
Right.
it's like when they talk to another recruitment agent from the industry, they sort of figure out, oh, probably I'm not being paid enough. So what have you come across pay equity issues as a leader where you've seen, oh my gosh, my female staff members are being paid substantially lower, or like other gender diverse professionals are being paid lower compared to other genders?
Um, in my positions on the leadership side, I haven't. I know it does happen, but I'm very fortunate that I haven't witnessed this. And the pay equity was always on point with whether male or female. So I'm really happy, and I think that has a lot to do with the type of company that I worked for. They were very conscious of making sure it was fair. And one of the particular companies, they even had a gender equity committee who I was a part of, and represented for New Zealand. And then they had I had an Australia co-chair, and we were very, very, um, I'd say very, not strategic, but very careful about how we made sure that gender inequality around pay wasn't a factor within the company we were working on, because we were part of that equity board.
So
So
when you were a part of the equity board, did you think that it was quite transparent? The policies were all transparent. You had access to it. Okay.
yeah, it was, and we worked very closely with the HR team as well to make sure that they knew how serious we were about bringing that whole gender inequality discussion to the table, to make sure that the pay was equal depending on what the roles were, regardless of gender.
Cool. So if you could implement one major change in the tech industry to make it more inclusive, what would it be?
To make it more inclusive, probably more education around gender bias. I think that's where a lot of businesses fall short, that they don't recognize when there is bias. And so I think education, a lot more education when you are running a business, when you have staff, around gender bias and what that entails, and how to make sure you're not falling into the whole, I guess, rabbit hole where sometimes I found myself, and not thinking, oh, I'm not going to say anything here because this must be the way it happens, and just making sure that the company that you're representing has a good system. And I think that's a really key one.
Cool. In the last 20 years, in all the different organizations you've worked in, is there any specific policy or something that you have witnessed in the organization and you thought, wow, this is absolutely amazing. This is exactly what every organization should be doing?
Well, that would definitely be the business I joined that had a gender equity team. Um, and it was purely run out of Australia.
Mhm.
And I actually put my hand up and said, can I be the New Zealand counterpart or co-chair? And they said, what a fantastic idea. Let's do it. So that was definitely, yeah, that was huge.
Now, looking back at your journey, is there anything you wish you had known earlier in your career?
Ooh, anything I would have, oh, wow, that's a good question. Um, I think early on, not being afraid of approaching people who were experts in their areas. I wished I would have got a bit more knowledge, or made the effort to learn what they did,
Mm.
rather than be afraid of asking them a question where I think, oh, was that a really silly question to ask? Yeah,
Mm.
definitely meet a lot more of the experts that were coming into the sector and learning from them.
What keeps you motivated and inspired to continue advocating for gender equality in tech?
Ooh, I I think my work with the communities and encouraging more females into the sector, because we still have a lot of work to do in that space. We don't have as many females looking at the technology sector as a viable career pathway, and I'm very passionate about, going and speaking at high schools and talking to students, and just saying, hey, this is what I do. This is where I started out, and the technology sector has taken me to all of these places across the globe. And I'm just so fortunate that I just accidentally fell into the space, or got the push from my mum to learn computing to begin with. So I think that keeps me passionate. Keeping, making the technology sector look like a great sector for our youth to come into. That is something that I'm very passionate about. And you'll see that when I'm doing a lot of the community work, particularly in underrepresented communities, because we have, a lack of technology in those communities, and I love to bring technology into those communities, and you just see the youth faces light up when they see that technology and think, wow, how do I do this? How do I make these robotic things work? And just, creating that spark, I think is what keeps me motivated.
Great. Now, finally, what message do you want to leave for women, aspiring tech professionals, and leaders who are listening today?
I'm going to take it back to, I think that with everything going on in the world, this is not the time to eliminate the diversity of voices, because these voices that represent diversity, they're the game changers of the industries. And I think we need to keep embracing that, whether it's as individuals or as a business. Um, Talented individuals with different points, of you are just the people who turn out to be the game changers in your team, and so they're not people to be frightened of. And I think that would be my parting piece of wisdom.
Great. Thank you, Irene. Thank you so much for your time. It was great
Thank
to have
you.
you here with us.
My
Thanks so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really enjoyed the conversation. We should definitely do it again.
Yes, yeah, definitely we will. Cool. Thank you.